In this video, I'm going to use inexpensive construction lumber to build this waterfall-edge modern console table. I figure if this wood's good enough to build a house, I don't see why it's not been good enough to show off your prize knickknacks. So the plan for this project is actually pretty simple. The whole thing only costs about 40 bucks and you only need 3 boards. To get started, I'm going to use two 2x8 by 8 foot boards and one 2x8 by 10 foot board. And that's a mouthful to say in one sentence. To get started, I'm going to take the factory edges off these boards using the table saw. This is actually an optional step. You don't really have to do this, but it does make for a clean edge when you go to your glue up. I'm only taking off about 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch here. You can see that one of my 8 foot boards is a little wonky, so I'm going to cut this one down to hopefully make it a little less wonky, because the only thing better than having one wonky board is, of course, 2. So after these boards are cut, it's time to get ready for the glue up, and because I'm effectively making a 150-inch long plank, I decided to do this glue up in a couple of different segments. Now if you're braver than I am, you can just go for it, but I decided not to here. So the first panel that I'm gluing together is going to be the full 10 foot board length, and then the shorter cut from that 8 foot board. I had to channel my inner John Cena here to wrestle these first boards into place, making sure I was as aligned as I could be. Since I was dealing with part of that wonky board, it was a bit like wrestling a gator for a hot second, but we got her figured out. While that first glue up was drying, I'm going to hit these brackets with a little bit of black paint. And you can leave this galvanized look if you want to, I guess, but I chose to polish this thing up with a little black accent. And look at that, the glue up is done. So let's move on to the next piece of this glue up. I took some time here just to lay out the last 2 planks to see how things were going to go, and this helped me make sure I had everything in place with how all the clamps were going to get set up. Just remember, you are building a teeter-totter here, so keep an eye on that other board or else. And for your glue up, my advice is to focus on the top panel being as even as possible. It's just going to save you time in that long run, as you have to sand less of an edge down. And just keep in mind that since this is construction grade lumber and I didn't use any fancy tools to plane or align these boards perfectly, you're going to have some discrepancies between the materials, which you're just going to have to live with. Obviously the warped board is a prime example of this, but we're going to keep pushing forward. And here we go. So it's all glued up and it's time to move on to the cuts. Right, Boone? Okay, so I lied a little bit. We're actually gonna hit the big huge panel we just made with the sander, just so it's a little bit easier to get to and sand on later. So this piece is gonna be about 36 inches tall, and what I'm gonna do is make my first line to cut about 36.5 inches from the edge of my panel. I'm going to leave each leg here a little long so I can square them up after I finish these miter cuts. With that 36.5 inch cut, I'm just going to measure the width of my tabletop, which is 6.5 feet long, and scribe another line there, and then follow that up with another 36.5 inch mark as well. So here I'm just going to use a triangle to mark out the 45-degree angle I need to cut, because if you're like me, you just need all the help you can get to avoid potential issues later on. And at this point in the project, I really don't want to start over because of a bad cut. So as I said, this is a really inexpensive project you can do with minimal tools. All in all, this project was about 40 bucks, and the only real tools you need for this is a circular saw, a sander, and a couple clamps, and power drills. And I said the table saw is optional. You could even use pocket hole screws here too if you don't want to use clamps. So the next thing I'll do is just set the circular saw to 45 degrees and try to cut inside the lines that you made earlier. And I'm not sure if it was my saw or me or the blade I was using, but this saw was riding the struggle bus all the way through these boards, and I think I'm about due for a new saw, maybe with one with some bigger cojones. And here I am just squaring up the edges of my two legs, just so I can make everything nice and level. So in my video editor, I called this scene Screw Ups, partly because of how I'm going to fasten everything together, but also because of this is where everything I mentioned before kind of catches up to me, kind of like that red shell in a Mario Kart race. So the slight warps in the boards and the small tolerances that were affecting my circular saw cuts kind of came together here to make these glue up miter edges less than perfect. So I think I covered it up pretty well with the edits here, but let me tell you, it was a struggle. I had issues with alignment and had a lot of clamps and stuff on the back end. Don't worry though, we're just gonna pivot like Ross did in Friends, get that couch up the stairs. So after I screwed the underside of the brackets in for stability, I was going to add these 3.5-inch screws on top. This was always my original idea, but had to kind of come to this a little bit sooner. It's really a good idea here since they're going to add a ton of stiffness to this joint. And all I did was locate some screw locations on the top and the side of these, pre-drilled the holes, and then sent the screws all the way home. And I decided to use 3/8 diameter dowels to clean the piece up a little bit, but at this point it kind of felt like polishing a, well, you know what, since the miter edges were far from perfect. I added some wood putty too here to close the gaps and came back and cut off the exposed dowels. Did I mention how fun these saws are though? And then one last piece, I'm just going to install these leveling pads. It'll help take up any unevenness in the table between the sides. And honestly though, I was pretty surprised it was very even when I set it on the floor. So I'm pretty happy about that. And then to finish it, I'm just going to use this 2-in-1 stain and polyurethane. And here it is, all set up and finished. Even with the corner struggles though, I really like how this turned out. It's pretty simple, and honestly, it's pretty hard to beat having a solid piece of wood furniture for under $40. Thanks for watching.